OnePlus One was a legend amongst legends when it was first released. Unveiled in April 2014, it was the first product of OnePlus and was the original flagship killer with amazing specs for half the price of flagships produced by behemoths like Samsung and Apple. With their famous slogan, "Never settle," OnePlus quickly took the market by storm with its developer-friendly device. They sold 1 million units by the end of 2014 when their original goal was only 50,000, and the device generated a total revenue of over $300 million through September 2014. So, what did OnePlus do to continue its legacy, and how does their newest flagship, the OnePlus 10 Pro, stand up against the OnePlus One in terms of improvements and changes? Let the facts speak. After all that praise, I must say that the performance of the camera is kind of underwhelming. This was definitely the weak point of the first ever released OnePlus, and is something that has haunted them throughout the years because even though they were the go-to flagship killers with regard to hardware, the camera software had some flaws. Compared to the Galaxy S, this device was released 4 years later in 2014, and even then, their performance isn't all too different. The biggest issue I have is with the contrast and how the dark spots are even darker, which leads to an overall deficit of important details. Another detail is how important your support is to us, and if you would like to top it off with a like and a sub to our channel. I think you would. Anyway, portrait photos will be the same since the OnePlus One doesn't have this mode and the same issues are persevering. If you watched our other comparison videos of the first and last releases of brands, you might be thinking that I'm being too strict this time. Well, the OnePlus One was released in 2014, while the Galaxy S, like I mentioned, was released in 2010. There's 4 years difference. The iPhone 2G, on the other hand, was released in 2007. There's a big difference in technology and also in expectation. Like I said, this device has amazing hardware for its time and was definitely a game changer, but the software is lacking when compared to the superior hardware. Even then, there are some things that they did really well, like the rear camera being able to record gorgeous 4K video, with the quality of it being absolutely amazing. In fact, if you don't take the stabilization into account, I'd say that the 4K video of the OnePlus One is very close in quality to the OnePlus 10 Pro, minus some software issues. And we've arrived at zoom, with pretty similar characteristics to other first generation phones. No optical zoom and limited digital zoom. One difference to other older phones is that I'd say its digital zoom can be considered decent, as it's somewhat usable when the others weren't really like this. Overall though, even though the OnePlus 10 Pro would land at the bottom of the list when it comes to zoom, it's naturally going to be miles ahead of the first ever OnePlus device with a 3.3x optical zoom in its back pocket. The OnePlus One obviously doesn't have a macro mode, but it's able to capture very similar quality to the 10 Pro, in which we prefer to use a 3.3x optical zoom to kind of make it like a macro photo. This shows us that the focus of the OnePlus One is actually quite high quality, as it's able to get up close and personal while retaining good visuals even though all it's capable of is digital zoom. On the other hand, stabilization is also like the other first-gen phones, as there is no electronic image stabilization to depend on. This leads to the frame shaking in all directions as soon as there's any movement, no matter how small. This obviously isn't a surprise, even though the phone is kind of new compared to the other first-gen phones, but video stabilization wasn't a main focus point of developers at that time, which is fully understandable. I would have also reached the same conclusion if the front camera turned out bad, because once again, during those times, improving the hardware of the phones was much more important. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw the crisp images from the front camera of the OnePlus One. Yeah, you've got some software issues here and there, mostly about the background, but in some cases, my face actually looked better than in the OnePlus 10 Pro. So can you imagine this quality in 2014? People were definitely amazed. The video quality doesn't hold up to the standards of the photos though, as the OnePlus phone still can't shoot 4K with the front camera, preferring to stay at 1080p 30fps. And now it's the battle of the OnePluses. Over here is the OnePlus One, the first ever released OnePlus phone. And here we have the latest flagship, the OnePlus 10 Pro. Thankfully, the first OnePlus can actually do video recording with its front camera, so we can easily test what the audio quality sounds like. Tell us what you think about the differences. Obviously, the audio quality of the OnePlus One is a bit better than the other first generation phones we reviewed because it came out quite a bit later than them. But at the same time, I kinda like how the sound quality of it is smooth and the noise cancelling doesn't bother me as much as it usually does. The 10 Pro on the other hand has clearer and louder audio and will most likely give a better performance indoors when there are no sounds in the background. I'll leave it up to you to decide, but I like them both regardless. The sun has already gone down by the time we got to this part, and it's a great time to experience that these gadgets can function properly when there's no light. Although OnePlus is one of the leading figures in night photo and videography, we can see that they achieved this later on, as this was not the case in the past. In a world where any phone before 2016 or something is likely to have really bad results at night, no one can fault this guy for having noise and grain issues, but I can praise the 10 Pro for doing a really good job balancing out shadows and streetlights while having accurate white balance. Now it's time to take a look at the specs of these two devices, because as usual, we believe it's important to see the improvements over the years to better grasp the direction that the respective companies have taken. The release dates are June 2014 for the OnePlus ONE, and the OnePlus 10 Pro came out on the 13th of January 2022. The OnePlus ONE has a glass front which is protected by Gorilla Glass 3, and there's a plastic back version for this phone, but we actually have the sandstone, sandpaper kind of texture one, which is really unique. I've personally never seen something like this before. The latest flagship, on the other hand, is following a trend, with a Gorilla Glass Victus protected front, a Gorilla Glass 5 protected glass back, and an aluminum frame. The first ever OnePlus has an IPS LCD screen that is 5.5 inches, which is a really generous size. 1080 by 1920, 16 by 9 ratios with a 401 ppi. In comparison, the 10 Pro has an LTPO2 fluid AMOLED screen at 120Hz, HDR10+, and 1300 nits brightness. The size is 6.7 inches, 1440 by 3216 pixels, 20 by 9, and 525 ppi. Now, those are some big upgrades to fit the theme of smartphones in 2022. The One ran on Android 4.4.2, which was codenamed KitKat, and the chipset was a Snapdragon 801 from Qualcomm, with the 10 Pro hosting the newest Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. Moving on to one of the biggest differences, the cameras, the first kit on the block had a single main camera of 13 megapixels with HDR and a 5 megapixel selfie camera, which took fairly impressive photos. The newest kit on the block has a 48 megapixel wide, 50 megapixel ultra wide, and an 8 megapixel telephoto zoom camera. On top, the selfie camera is 32 megapixels with auto HDR. Lastly, the battery of the OnePlus ONE is a lithium-ion 3100 mAh one, which once again is pretty big for its time and surely must have raised some eyebrows. 10 Pro has a 5000 mAh one with the signature OnePlus 80-watt fast charging, 65 watts for North America. That was a lot of information, and I think all of it is necessary to accurately show the development stages of OnePlus from day one to current times. What a revolution the release of the OnePlus ONE was, and I hope we were able to show you just how far they've been able to come. Please like this video and subscribe, as we're getting closer and closer to our very own YouTube play button, and you can be part of it. Enjoy the warm weather and keep in touch.